If President Obama's previous State of the Union addresses had been among the offerings on the game show Deal or No Deal, well, for the most part, the Republican responses would have been no deal. And few expect that dynamic to change tomorrow night. The president is expected to hit on the theme of income and wealth inequality, which plays well, just not with Republican lawmakers. So if you're looking for an Obama proposal tomorrow that might actually pass Congress, the best odds might be on immigration reform. Expect the president to ring this bell tomorrow, as some Republicans are now publicly supporting some measures of reform this election year, though most of those stop short of paths to citizenship. It's unclear what kind of reception universal pre-K will get. The president is expected to unleash that very de Blasio-like idea tomorrow night as well. Less likely than other Obama proposals will fare as well in Congress, including an expected call to raise the minimum wage. And let's be honest, the president's expected call for more infrastructure spending probably won't even get a vote in the House. And with so much congressional disagreement over Obama proposals, keep an ear peeled for talk of executive orders tomorrow night. The president is expected to announce that unless he gets help, he will go around Congress in areas including retirement, security, and job training. The hope is that that threat will at least spur lawmakers into action. The risk, claims of executive overreach and an imperial presidency. And let's start with those executive orders. There is an obvious risk that this could be seen as the president overstepping his bounds, doing away with the checks and balances of the Constitution. I can almost hear the Tea Party reaction to it right now. You think it's a good idea that the president goes, to the executive order route if need be, if he can't get anything past Congress?
Yeah, I mean, the notion of an imperial presidency today is such hogwash. There is absolutely no way in which our presidents can be imperial today, particularly on domestic policy. And this entire debate about, the pen and the phone and the stuff he's been saying about going around Congress, he's going to go around Congress as best he can, but the major things on his agenda, he needs to work with Congress to get them through. So sure, he can use executive orders as best he can, but he's going to need to work with Congress. And, I was thinking today, the old Richard Neustadt book, Presidential Power, which is, one of the great, it's a little bit controversial, but one of the great books on the presidency, talked about how limited presidential power is. He wrote that in 1960. It's the same today, particularly when you're dealing with a party of the other, another party in either or both houses of Congress. So, he's going to use executive orders as best he can. Podesta has called for them. I think it makes sense. I would tell him to do it, but you can't get immigration reform that way. You can't get, background checks. You can't get, all the major things on his agenda.
But you can stop deportations of illegal.
You can work around the edges. Why didn't he do that in his first 5 years as much as he's talking about now? Because it's not as effective as legislation through Congress.
This feels like a weak presidential move to me. This is what you do when the limits, there's a lot of checks on your power, your ability to do anything. It almost seems like he's dealing from a position of weakness in this.
It's not weakness, it's reality. The Republican House will not engage in the lawmaking process. Okay.
Does this get them to engage?
I doubt it. He's using what powers the Constitution gives him. If he exceeds them, he ought to be slapped down by the courts and public opinion. If he doesn't exceed those powers, he ought to do what he thinks is right. It's not very controversial stuff here, unless you're trying to manufacture a fake issue.
It'll play well with his base going with the executive orders. I mean, what is this president to do? I mean, if it doesn't work at the end of the day, and if he oversteps his bounds, then the downside to that is he's a lame duck. But I mean, this president is looking towards his legacy. He's looking towards saying, what can I accomplish? Granted, you can't do immigration, but there are a lot of things that he can do simply by executive order. You guys on the right, Republicans, you don't want to work with me, or maybe you do, but you're just not working with me. Okay, my time is winding down. I'm going to do what I have to do.
His time isn't winding down. He's got 3 full years. And if he picks...
Every day now, his time is winding
down. If that's what you mean by winding down, his time is winding down.
Well,
but that's not the point.
But his productive time may be winding down. I mean, this is...
Of course it's winding down.
And here's why I say this, Richard, because normally a State of the Union is, here are the things that we want to get accomplished this year.
He will do that.
But most people are already saying this is less about what's going to get done in 2014 and more about here's where we're setting the boundaries for the 2014 midterms.
He will set out a set of aspirational goals. He will probably be realistic enough to know that with the Tea Party in control of the House, they're not going to get enacted into law. He'll then say, I'll do what I can within the powers of the executive branches that are given to me. I don't think there's anything remarkable about this.
And
if anything, he should have done it before.
And if you look at the major themes the White House has talked about, optimism and action, a lot of this is about his attempt to turn the page from a very difficult last year where his poll numbers have plummeted. So he wants to say, you know what, this is what I want to do. I'm willing to work with you in a bipartisan manner. If you don't meet me at the table, I'm going to take this other route because I am committed to doing things on behalf of my constituents. I mean, this is a lot about turning the page.
And you study the numbers, things like inequality, universal pre-kindergarten, minimum wage, infrastructure, immigration. Are these popular enough to actually move the needles if we are going to be just focused on the midterm elections? Are they strong enough issues?
It's interesting, right? You think of something like background checks, very popular when you look at the polls, and yet can't get through Congress. So it almost doesn't matter to a certain extent what the polls say about something like immigration.
I've been trying to argue that for the last year, that it doesn't matter what the polls say.
But the way that the Congress is structured, the way that this government is structured, it almost doesn't matter. So yeah, I mean, you look at something like immigration, the American public has, there is support for dealing with the issue of immigration, but in the nitty-gritty of how you do that, there's a lot of division. And is that going to make it past Congress? No. And you have the Republicans saying that they, are willing to move on immigration at this point, and that's why he's including it in his speech. He's not including things that he doesn't think he can get past because background checks. He knows he needs to have action this year to move the country forward.
You seem down. Is this conversation getting you down?
No, not in the least. The consequences of an ideological, the ideological supremacy of the Tea Party is really bad for the country. It's not that they're wrong on everything. That's not my point. It's that by making it impossible to do what government historically has done, negotiate, compromise, and move forward, that you get into these bizarre situations where the president is blamed for the failure of the Congress to act. That tends to be historically the way it works. It's just bizarrely unfair.
And we're actually going to get more into that a little bit later on in the show, but I'm just curious, is the president's best chance for really getting anything done at this point? Well, it's either to become a Republican and adopt every Republican position, which I don't think is going to happen. Should he just be in full campaign mode this year? Should it just be all about the midterms in the hopes that he can win a majority in the House?
Go slow. He didn't have a bad year. He's had a bad 3.5 months. He's had a bad 3.5 months, precipitated largely by the disastrous rollout of Obamacare. They are banking on the fact that people are starting to enroll, and the notion that health care is going to be available is going to change the politics.
But if you look at...
If he doesn't get that result, he can't be in campaign mode and succeed.
But by any measure of looking at last year's State of the Union, very few of the things he talked about got through. So I agree with you. The poll numbers started to drop with the Obamacare rollout, which was disastrous, although the Republicans helped him with their idiocy with shutting the government. But you look at what he said last year and what he proposed, and from the measure of somebody in office, they have to say it's a bad year because the things I wanted to do didn't get done. And you can blame Congress, which absolutely he has a right to do, but it wasn't a good year.
As bad as his numbers may be, Congress's numbers are 20 times worse.
They're worse,
that's fair enough, but also fewest laws passed on record last year. So anything that can get the president's signature.
It's not the ideological fight, it's the willingness to paralyze the government that will be parceled out as political blame in ways that Republicans don't yet understand.
And again, we'll get more on the Tea Party in just a little bit. By the way, speaking of the State of the Union, RNN and FiOS 1 are your home for complete coverage. Little programming note here. Previews beginning at 5 tomorrow night on FiOS 1, and of course it'll be the main topic of conversation on RFL at 6. Then the address itself starts at 9. I will be in D.C. for a reaction from lawmakers. After President Obama is done, please join us. Up next on RFL is less, actually more, on the Chris Christie investigations. The State Senate and State Assembly combine their special panels digging dirt on the governor, why they may be bad news for the governor, coming up next.